Um, so can I like ask how you first became involved with the traditional dance and music world?
Sure. That would take me back to high school days. And my parents had four children. I'm number two. And my mother was a wonderful piano player and church organist. And she saw to it that all four of her kids took music lessons growing up. My instrument was piano, starting at, I don't know, pretty early age. And my older brother, firstborn, um, he he got interested in bluegrass and old time music when he was in high school, and then he went to a 2-year technical agricultural school for a forestry degree called Delhi Tech. That's over in New York State. Anyway, he picked up more of that kind of music from classmates, friends of his at college, brought that home with him. And so he passed that interest along to me and my younger brother, who you might have heard of, Rodney.
Oh yeah, I know the name.
Well, his instrument growing up is like you, he was classical violin. Then he turned to fiddle. So the three of us, the three brothers, in high school got interested in old time and bluegrass. We even had a little family band, the three of us. And I have a sister, and she's the youngest, and her instrument was cello.
Oh, that's fun. My sister played cello too.
Nice. Yeah. And so then I went off to college and met up with some classmates at Oberlin College that were into banjo and old time music and some bluegrass. I even was asked to call a square dance around my junior year in college, which I had no experience doing.
Yeah, so you had no experience and you were just asked to call?
Yeah, no one
How'd you
else
manage
was willing
that?
to do it. So I stood on a chair in one of the co-op dining rooms, and some bunch of students danced, and I studied a book of square dance calls before I went to do it. But it wasn't for me. I wasn't not I got through the evening. I knew I was never going to be a caller. Um, but in college, I started playing guitar, and well, actually in high school. So that was my main instrument for a number of years. And then I graduated from college and moved immediately to Boston, from Ohio to Boston. And then I had a new set of friends that I made in Boston area, some of whom were interested in New England fiddle music and also Irish fiddle music.
Hmm.
And a couple of my friends and we found out about an immigrant Irish fiddler named Paddy Cronin who lived in the Boston area. And we would visit him as often as we could and trade tunes and stuff. And I was just enthralled with his playing and style, the embellishments, the ornaments, so different from traditional mountain music. But some of the same tunes. He was playing some tunes that we knew, and like that was such a revelation.
Hmm. It's
Yes,
just
you
so
know that
cool.
feeling? Yeah. So another of my friends in Boston, I didn't have a car, and he said, "Hey Randy, there's these great dances up in New Hampshire, Francistown, and Fitzwilliam. You want to go?" I said, "Sure." So he took me up to a Francistown dance, and that would have been about 1971. Yeah. And I was just enthralled with the scene. In fact, I sat on the side bench the whole dance because I just didn't dare get up and dance. It just looked too complicated, and I didn't want to jump in and spoil the fun for the other dancers who knew what they were doing. But soon I got the hang of it. And I think Dudley Loftman was calling at the time.
Oh
He
my
was,
gosh, yeah.
the main, the only one really. And so a whole bunch of us followed him like it was a religion. Every weekend we had to go to the dance. And Dudley was great because he encouraged, didn't mind sit-in musicians in the back of the stage. Very generous approach that he had.
Hmm.
So that's, I sat in at the back, and that's where I started learning tunes and style and stuff. So that was, and then my younger brother, well, both my brothers ended up moving to New Hampshire around that time. And my younger brother and I started a duo, contradance duo, where I was playing piano while at the same time I was kind of teaching myself fiddle, Irish fiddle. And he played fiddle, and we were just about the only polished, I guess you'd say, dance bands at that time.
Yeah,
Swallowtail was just emerging, that band. I don't know if you heard of them.
I have. Yeah.
Swallowtail, yeah. David Cantini and that group. But they were south, they were Massachusetts, and we were in New Hampshire, north. So, and he and I recorded. And here's the thing, Ainsley, growing up, so I had this grounding in piano.
Hmm.
I had to take music theory classes.
Hmm.
I studied actually at the Eastman School of Music over in Rochester.
Nice.
Yeah. And you had to take theory. And when I got to college, although I was an English major, I ended up English lit. I did take some music classes as electives, theory. So I kept gaining knowledge about structure of music. So when I hit New Hampshire and the contra dances and sat next to Bob McQuillan,
Oh my gosh.
and when he was playing with the boom chuck, and I loved
Hmm.
Bob. But and I say this with all humility, I knew exactly what he was doing from the get-go. And I didn't need to have a teacher. I didn't need to study a book. I could play immediately, contradance piano. And it was so fun, and I just loved it so much. So kind of took off from there. My brother and I made a recording 1976 called Castles in the Air. And
Yeah.
then we did more of a band, two albums. I think it was 81 and 82, New England Chestnuts. Yeah, you probably heard of that.
I've learned some tunes off there.
Oh, yeah, good. So after those two Chestnut albums came out, we kind of went our separate ways, my brother and I. And I kept playing piano for dances. I kept playing fiddle, and the dance community was enlarging, getting bigger every year. More callers were emerging, young people interested in calling. I can think of Tony Parks in the Boston area. Ralph Page was still active. He was quite elderly in those days, but Todd Whittemore,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
worked with Todd a lot. He's a great guy. His sister Wendy, you know Wendy?
No, I don't. I've met Todd once, but
Okay,
yeah.
a lot of fun, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
So, so I just kept this kind of dual track of Irish fiddle and New England fiddle. There's lots of great New England tunes, as you know,
Hmm.
some Scottish tunes, some Cape Breton. One or two of my friends just got bitten by the Cape Breton bug, but I
That's
never
fun.
quite merged into that too much. I like to listen to it.
It's
Um,
beautiful to listen to. It's never been
yeah.
my thing to play either.
Do you play some Cape Breton style tunes? Or?
Not a whole lot. Not yet anyway. We'll see what the
Yeah,
future holds.
it's a very unique style, very compelling, very
Yes.
energetic. And yeah, I've been up to Cape Breton a couple times. I've been to Ireland 3 times in the course of
Whoa.
my life. Yeah, the last time was like 2 years ago, and me and my wife, we went there together, and we were there 3 weeks, and we hit a session almost every single night.
Oh my
Different
gosh.
session traveling around the west coast. So you have to get to Ireland sometime if you like Irish fiddle.
I do, and I totally want to go once I graduate high school at least.
Yeah. So I had one or two uh, finer points if you're interested about the music.
Of course.
Now, I'm not sure if you saw the video that has me explaining about chorus jig and
Yes. Yeah.
so that was one of the things I wanted to tell you, and the key to that is that chorus jig. That's one of those tunes that all of a sudden, me and my friends, we would go into a record store in Boston back in those days. That's all they had were 33 albums and then the 45s. That's how I learned tunes. But we picked up Irish traditional music albums in this shop in Boston, and one of the ones was called Paddy and the Smoke, and that's the one that I talked about. Yeah, and that's where the Irish musicians in a London pub were playing chorus reel. They called it chorus reel.
Wow.
Yeah, so the first time I heard that, I was like, wait a minute, we know that we play that all the time. We call it chorus jig. But, and then, the C part is what my friend and I, we decided, there's a C chord, right?
Hmm.
It's a modal. That's the Irish version. Whereas
Oh,
before,
interesting.
yeah, before that, Ralph Page, you can listen to old recordings from the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s that you can hear chorus jig played by New England bands, and it's played more like so
Oh,
it's like
interesting.
a 1-5 chord. Do you know 1-4-5? You know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about? So the melody would outline 1-4-5, and it was the Irish version that my friend Jack and I introduced, the modal version. And I would say about 72, 73, somewhere around in there, 1973. And ever since then, I think every dance band uses the Irish modal.
I've only ever heard the Irish
Yeah,
version.
there you
That's
go.
so cool.
Yeah. So maybe it'll go full circle sometime and fiddlers will get back to the 1-4-5 version. I don't know.
Maybe. Wow, that's amazing.
So that's from the early 70s, Ainsley, that, specifically how a tune that's in the common repertoire of Ireland, Western Europe, New England, settled by immigrants, some of whom were from Ireland, and then modified, maybe made a little easier to play, not technically so challenging. Um, and but so I would consider that a real milestone in the New England contra dance music, the incorporation of Irish style and Irish tunes into the repertoire. So before the early 1970s, it would be all French Canadian or English, New England. That's it.
That's
After about
fascinating.
yeah, after about 1970, then you get not only Irish but Cape Breton infiltrating into the contra dance music repertoire to this day. Now, I want to tell you about one other thing. Back in my piano playing days, I copied Bob McQuillan, basically, emulated him, loved his style. And one of those albums that I was telling you about that we would buy in Boston was um, called A Tribute to Michael Coleman.
Mm, I haven't
That's the
heard of
name
it.
of the album. I recommend it. It was recorded in the late 60s, I believe, 1960s. And Andy McGann is the fiddler from New York City. Have you ever heard of him?
I haven't.
Oh my gosh. He was classically trained Irish musician who was one of the all-time great Irish fiddlers, long since passed away. If you can listen to Andy McGann, because he had the sweetest tone. Somehow he worked and got his playing to the point where not only could it be fast, but it could have great tone.
It's awesome.
Anyway, he was the fiddler. I think Joe Burke, the button accordion player, was on that album, and there was a piano player from New York City named Felix Dolan.
Oh, I have heard that name.
Yes, okay, Felix Dolan, and he he played Irish style backup piano, and I would listen to that album endlessly, and I started copying and learning the chord progressions that he used and introducing them into contradance, which hadn't been done before, remember. You have to think of contradance pre-1970 as 1, 4, 5. That's maybe an occasional minor, relative minor thrown in very, very occasionally. So here's to illustrate one of the things that I picked up from Felix Irish backup piano was I'm going to I'll play this Patty on the Railroad. You probably know that. I'll play this slowly, and in the B part, um, that's the B part, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so if I were playing contradance piano prior to 1970, I would back it up with something like this.
Mhm.
1, 4, 5s.
Mhm.
Now, Felix Dolan would do this kind of progression, which I picked up from him and started playing. Go back. This is the B part again. Okay, so there you've got one chord. You would go to the 6th chord, the relative minor, and the 2 chord, which is sort of the 5th of the 5th, right? That's an E. E minor is the 5th of A. So there you've got instead of so that's what was, I would say, revolutionary for early 70s, was to that kind of chord progression had never been heard, not heard.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So again, that would be a milestone in chord use of chord structure in New England contradance. And after that, everyone, Peter Barnes, all the piano players started using the Irish style. Now, in the last, 15, 20, fiddle, not so much piano. So I kind of got left behind.
Yeah.
Piano. She's a piano player.
I'm so sorry. My
you hear
internet
okay?
connection in my dorm just got really bad. What were you saying? I missed probably the last 15 seconds. What?
So, have you heard of Julie Velamont?
Oh,
Gimpler?
yes, I have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. She has kind of pushed and progressed piano playing backup in great new directions. Well, she's not the only one. There's, too many to name now. But, then we're talking about in the last maybe 15, 20 years, the use of the minor third, right? And that was unheard of in my era when I was playing back in the 70s and the 80s. Never played that minor third. So that's another step in the evolution. I don't know who to credit that for, but I mean, there's probably other. So there's two things I wanted to share with you. Any questions or,
Wow.
anything
I
else?
mean, that's just so amazing. Because obviously those changes are what I've known as just like normal playing.
Right.
It's just so interesting to imagine, before that.
Yeah. Well, when my brother and I would do those tunes and I would use those chords, people and the dancers who were dancing, they would just go crazy. I mean, whooping and shouting because they'd never heard that either. It was very exciting and motivating for them. But like anything, the more the more it's done, the less special it is because it becomes so familiar. But
And then people add new things and it continues
yeah,
on like that.
right.
That's so cool. Do you think like evolving the music like that or having changes like that is important to the life of the tradition? Do you think it's really important for the music to continue to change like that?
Well, up to a point. I'm not one who will give a blanket approval to that
Yeah.
because you're in danger of losing a specific genre or style if it's left open to too much interpretation and change. It's not jazz. Jazz is by nature improvisational and creative. And New England dance music is kind of the opposite. The improvisation, in my opinion, is minuscule. You play an A phrase from a tune, and then the next time around, you might change one or two notes or change the slurring pattern. To me, that's enough. But
Yeah.
some musicians carry it way, way past that.
That's certainly true. And I'm always worried about that, like finding a balance between playing in a modern idiom and also staying true to the tune's roots and to the tradition's roots.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but then again, there's always the possibility, I suppose, that after something evolves and goes through changes, that it goes so far beyond the original source that at some point there will be musicians who decide consciously to return to the source. And that becomes revolutionary in itself, right there.
Yeah, yeah. That's so crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, we obviously have like certain instruments that play New England tunes. I mean, it's rare these days, at least, to see like a saxophone in a dance band. But my understanding is like in the 1930s and 40s, there were like horns and such in our dance bands. So what effect do you think like instrumentation has on the music and the dancing?
Well, I think, if you keep in mind that the music for contra dancing is the purpose of it is for uplifting the dancers. It's not a performance. It's not a concert.
Mhm.
It shouldn't be. So whatever you decide, or a band or a musician decides to do with how they play or what they're playing or what the instrumentation is, it has to resonate with the dancers. You know, the dancers can't be looking up at the stage and like, what is that? You know, they need it's for them. It's a our music is a functional music. It's not an ornament. It's
Mhm.
to hang on the wall. It's used to facilitate dancing. So if you go too far from that, you know, if you introduce, I don't know, I think saxophone, clarinet, trumpet have been used
Mhm.
historically. Maybe, and I think the trumpet goes way back,
Mhm.
19th century. Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe clarinet too. I know it was a popular instrument. Saxophone, not so much. That's more of a jazz instrument that was introduced.
Yeah.
But again, you know, I've heard Irish musicians in pubs who are great at saxophone.
Oh, yeah.
Um, but you know, there was a New Hampshire fiddler named John Taggart who was born in the 1850s, and he wrote an autobiography which I read. And in it, at some point, he says, someone asked him what he thought of jazz, and he had no use for jazz. He thought it
It's
was the
funny.
worst kind of music. And this, because you know, he was talking about 1920s and 30s, and that's just when throughout the whole New England countryside and all the states, the radio was coming in, contra dancing, square dancing was starting to get competition from, you know, swing dancing,
Mhm.
other styles of dancing, jazz, the birth of jazz in those times. So Taggart was trying to hold the line, you know.
Yeah.
No, hate jazz, it's no good. Um, so I don't know, I forgot the point I was trying to make. But
That's really cool. That also reminds me, Emmeline asked me to ask you about finding the Taggart manuscript. She says it's a really cool story.
oh, well, I've always been interested in history, you know, New Hampshire history,
Mhm.
American history. So I joined the New Hampshire Historical Society as a member years ago, and they'd send out a newsletter periodically, or once a month or whatever. So one of the newsletters I got, like in 1985 or six, there was an article about this manuscript, typewritten, the Historical Society had acquired, and it was the Taggart. You know, he had typed his autobiography out, and it ended up at the society, and in the newsletter, it had a picture of it, you know, and mentioned that in the back of the book, Mr. Taggart had written out 75 fiddle tunes he grew up
Whoa.
playing and using as a contradance fiddler. And he had his own band, he had several bands. So I took my fiddle with me and drove over to Concord, and they let me go down in the basement where this manuscript was stored, and I played through every tune. And a lot of them were very common, you know, Patty on the Railroad, you know, Off She Goes. Very, very common that we all played already, but there were a couple dozen or so that I had never heard before. Very unique. Some that he claimed to have written himself.
Wow.
So we got together with Gordon Peary, a piano player, great
Mhm.
piano player,
Heard his
Nelson.
name.
Yeah, Gordon. And we decided to produce an album of the obscure Taggart tunes, and we did. Came out, I think, in 1989. Um, so, yeah.
That's
So
just so
Taggart,
fascinating.
um, yeah. There's another interesting. Dudley discovered and met a fellow named Dick Richardson, a fiddler.
Oh yeah, I've heard that name connected to Dudley somehow.
Yeah. Well, Dudley put out a cassette of some of Dick Richardson playing with a piano player. Nice cassette. And a couple of years ago, I went and met his daughter. She was quite old at the time, and hit it off with her. She told me stories, and she told me where he used to play for local contra dances. And I looked up this building. If you go to Keene, before you get to Keene, just if you go through Marlborough, you're heading west. And before you get to Keene, there's a right-hand turn. I forget the name of that. There's a little town. What is that town? I'll think of it. Anyway, if you turn right and then you'll go up a steep hill, so you end up on the hillside that overlooks Keene, the city of Keene. There's a bunch of houses and stuff, and up there's an old schoolhouse, a little brick schoolhouse. I found it, and that's where Dick Richardson played a weekly contra dance back in the 1920s. It was very popular.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's just amazing.
Yeah. Not too far from Dublin. So a couple of things about the fiddle, that historically, Yankee fiddling is pretty much sawing, up and down sawing.
Mhm.
Hardly any slurs, right? And very fast. Some of the old recordings you listen to, boy, they played incredibly fast.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So again, beginning around the early 70s, changes in how you played fiddle at dances came in to play. So then there was, it was influenced by Irish and Cape Breton mainly. So there's the cuts. So that started being introduced. You'd never heard that before. The use of slurs came in from Irish, and that's a real challenge because to play 112, 116, 118, 120 tempo really fast, maybe not for you, but for me,
Yeah, it's fast.
that's contra dance tempo.
Yeah.
It's really hard to put slurs in. It's much easier to saw away. Boom, boom, boom.
Hmm.
But you could do it, and it changes the flavor and the feeling of the tune, and anything that gets the dancer's attention and helps them have more fun at the dance. Do it. So
Yeah.
slurs. What else?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I guess I'd never thought of like the little changes that kind of come into being as ways of changing up for the dancers. I just never thought about it. That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
This whole notion of medleys in a dance, everyone does it.
Yeah.
Everyone works hard, ahead of time, figuring out, well, we'll play this, designing your own medley with hopes that it'll work.
Mhm.
Well, Ralph Page, bless him, I met him a few times, and did some dances with him. He lived in Keene. Someone once asked him about medleys. What does he think of medleys for dances? And his reply was, if a tune is good enough to play once through the dance, it's good enough to play through the whole dance. So he frowned on medleys. You start off with a tune, you choose your tune, and that's the tune that you play for that particular dance. So,
and then it's on you to make it exciting enough that people enjoy it for the entire time.
yeah.
That's really interesting.
So that's his generation, that's what was done in his time. You just played one tune per for a particular dance. Uh, so this idea of medleys that came in, wow. And now, personally, Ainsley, I've done my fair share of 3 tune medleys,
Mhm.
even 4 tunes. These days, I prefer just 2 tunes.
It's so funny because I was thinking in my head that I prefer two tunes
Is
too.
that right? Why?
I don't know, it just feels better. It feels like the tune goes on for the right amount of time.
Yeah. Well, I think you get twice two tunes gives you a chance to really present each tune, develop it and really
Right.
get it into the dancers' heads, the melody. Hardly any of whom are musicians, they're just dancers, but they sense something. Um, so yeah, I just these days 2 tunes is plenty.
And I feel like one change of tune is, it catches you a bit by surprise if you've been going on the same one for a while and then you don't do it again. Yeah, I love two tune medleys.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, there's stuff that happened with the actual dances. I couldn't help you with that. You'd have to talk to a caller like
Mhm.
Todd Whittemore or even Peter. Peter could
Yeah,
explain the evolution of how the calling changed. Um,
there's so much there. Um, it's so you mentioned earlier that you like started learning, how dance tunes worked while playing sitting in with Dudley's band and like following the Dudley dances around. How big was the impact of the Dudley dances? Like, I've heard it explained like he was the only one doing it. Is that like actually true?
yeah, for a few years it was true. Now you
Wow.
had Ralph Page, who
Right.
was still calling in Cambridge, like a Thursday night or Tuesday night. He'd go down to Cambridge. He never owned a car, so he had to be driven.
Mhm.
But he was active, but not very frequently. In his prime in the 30s and 40s, he was calling almost every night, all over. Extremely active. But yeah, as far as contra dancing goes, Dudley came in, around 69, 70,
Mhm.
and was the only one doing it in the New Hampshire towns. And he went to Maine. He would call dances up in Maine and some in Vermont, some in Massachusetts, but mainly in New Hampshire. And here's the thing about Dudley: he was he was presenting, good contras and teaching them, and they were so fun and exciting. But as soon as he got some competition with young callers, um, he started to back off because I don't, for whatever reason, maybe he felt like he couldn't compete. He started kind of going primitive with his calling, like calling much simpler dances and more squares. And for a hardcore contra dancers, it wasn't exciting enough.
Yeah.
He started doing more family dances for kids. So, the bear went over the mountain, very simple stuff. But
My
that has
very
its,
first dance was a Dudley dance. It was like a family dance that he was calling. It's so funny to think about.
yeah. Well, that has its place, and he filled that niche.
Hmm.
But for a period of, oh gosh, maybe 10 years, his dances were the best. You had to
Hmm.
be, he's such a key person in the evolution and establishment of contra dancing, revival of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there anyone else that was like super important in the revival to that level, or even not even to that level? Who else was?
Well, Todd
Um,
Moore,
yeah.
Todd was pretty young. Well, he's my age, or a little younger than me. But those days, Um, and he was not afraid to introduce really complicated contras. The figures were complicated, but he had a good way of teaching, explaining. And he also did a lot of singing squares, which
Hmm.
consistently have been popular. Oh, this is going to be hard because after we end this interview, I'll think of someone I should have mentioned.
That's totally okay.
Dudley, Dudley. Oh, wow. George Marshall,
Mm-hmm.
very important. Peter Barnes, as far as piano playing, I mean, Kate Barnes.
Oh yeah, yeah.
He changed. She,
I heard, yeah, I was reading. Yeah.
yeah, he's on Facebook, and really great sense of humor he has.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, Wild Asparagus, the band.
Oh, I think it rings a bell. Not, yeah,
They
not very
go way back.
familiar.
They're still active, and they go way back, and they locked up Western Massachusetts.
That's so funny. Um, wow. Um,
Looking for other people to interview, or you're just curious?
just, for my own knowledge and thinking about the revival and mapping out who was where and stuff. That's, yeah. Um, I guess one of my last questions is, I mean, we're in a pandemic right now, and obviously there isn't much of a dance scene when people have to stay 6 feet apart.
Right.
Um, and I mean, the last time there was a lull in dancing, there were lots of changes. And so I guess I'm wondering if you think the pandemic will have a lasting impact on dancing or music or anything.
Well, it's a good question. My immediate response would be no, that it's going to come back, and because it's such a fun thing. It's fun for musicians and it's fun for dancers. So
Mhm.
I think it'll come back. But when I was, I got married and started having kids myself, and that made me have to stop going to dances so much because of the responsibilities of being a dad. So you're going to get that in every generation.
Mhm.
There'll be a core avid dancers, and then their life changes after a few years, and so the hope is that it gets passed on to new people, fresh people. It keeps going. I think it will. Now I play these days. I play mostly for Irish sessions, pub sessions around, and we've had to completely stop that.
Yeah.
I'm very confident that at some point later this year, hopefully, that those will start up again and be just as vibrant and